Welcome to today's community conversation. My name is Kelsey Hughes. I'm the Librarian 3 at the South Bowie branch of Prince George's County Memorial Library System, and I'm overjoyed to be here today with 3 excellent personal finance experts from around Maryland. In recognition of Money Smart Week, which is this week, we're going to be discussing personal finance advice, particularly for members of the LGBTQ community. Before we jump in, I wanted to take a moment to allow my panelists to introduce themselves. Panelists, could you please each introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your expertise and what brings you here today? And why don't we start with Fran?
Hi, everybody. My name is Fran Toler. I'm a financial advisor and the founder of my firm, Toler Financial Group, Toler. You can find us easily on the web. We have a lot of resources on our website. And we have developed an expertise and a specialty in working with a couple of different groups, including the LGBTQ community, but also I'm a bit Prince George's County focused because that's where I grew up, that's where I raised my kids, it's where I still live. And my perception is that it is quite neglected by quality financial advisors who are fee-based and independent. So our firm, we really strive to have an independent, planning-focused, accessible, diverse, inclusive firm with a focus on socially responsible investing as well. So we really strive to fit what we see as a huge gap in the personal finance sphere of services. So super excited to be here today and to meet you all.
Thanks, Fran. And Heath.
Well, it's a pleasure joining Kelsey, Fran, and Jesse for today's discussion on the LGBTQ community. My name is Heath Carlock. I'm native to this region. I was born in DC and raised in Prince George's County. And I've had the pleasure of traveling the world, teaching all over the world, including at war in Iraq and in Palestine, in Vietnam, post-earthquake Haiti, Dominican Republic, and projects on with the UN efforts on Millennium Development Goals in India and Singapore. It's a real privilege to come back in a capacity to work with a wonderful organization like the United Way as our lead grantor, and to work on behalf of Prince George's Community College, which is a staple and an anchor in the Prince George's community. I am an accredited financial counselor and accredited financial coach, and also a project management professional. I've been in this role, Fran, for 3 years, and really cut my teeth on the notion of financial literacy as an initiative nationally back in 2015, doing research on behalf of the wonderful organization who helped create the Common Core, Achieve Incorporated, and they were looking into financial literacy. So my arc in this space, I've seen it grow from being a back burner matter to now in this county in 2022, 2023, being part of the graduation requirements for high schoolers. So this county is taking a turn. The center that I work at believes in improved credit, increased savings, reduced debt, and increased use of financial products that put people on a path to wealth building and financial stability. And we do that through all free services, including free personal financial coaching, small business coaching, tax preparation, credit improvement solutions, home buying and major purchasing counseling, and workshops on demand. Financial education workshops are a critical way in this medium now because of COVID-19 to reach the community. I'm a graduate of President Clinton's master's program, Little Rock, Arkansas, and I'm a father of 3. And I just love the subject and the content matter. So thank you so much for having me, and I hope we explore the full worth of this issue.
Thanks so much, Heath. Jesse.
Thank you. My name is Jesse Ketterman. I'm with the University of Maryland Extension, and a lot of people aren't familiar with Extension, but we are the outreach education arm of University of Maryland College Park. And I am is a family and consumer science educator with a focus on financial literacy. And I'm also, similar to Heath, I'm an accredited financial counselor. And thank you for inviting me here today.
Thanks so much to all 3 of you for being here today. Before we start diving in on some of the advice you have to offer, I wanted to begin our conversation by talking about why it matters that our conversation is focused specifically on the LGBTQ plus community. There are many reasons why those in the LGBTQ plus community may need to make personal finance decisions with different consideration than those who do not identify as LGBTQ plus. And I think we'll get into a lot of those reasons today. But I wanted to share some statistics that may help frame our conversation. And then I'd love to hear from our panelists about generally reasons why this conversation is important to you. So in 2020, Experian conducted a financial priority survey of the LGBTQ plus community. A significant majority, so 62% of respondents, reported having experienced financial challenges because of their sexual orientation or gender identity, including discrimination or harassment at work, marriage inequality laws that reduced retirement security for couples, discrimination leading to higher housing costs, and lower salary or reduced chance of promotion. And of course, it's likely that the pandemic has worsened some of these economic challenges, and also folks who have intersecting marginalized identities, particularly LGBTQ plus people of color, may face additional systemic barriers and challenges that lead to additional financial challenges or considerations. So panelists, I'd love to hear if you have anything you want to say to just start us off about why it matters to you to have this conversation, or what kind of introductory thoughts you have about LGBTQ plus folks and money. And perhaps we could start it with Jesse. Would you like to start us off?
Sure, thank you. I think you touched on many of the reasons why it is important for this community. The relationship aspect and the marriage inequality piece that you mentioned is going to be a huge part because your start of your finances and whether you're married or not married, how those resources play out and how they play together and how they may separate are all challenges that the LGBTQ community may face. And also when you get into the kind of the later life planning in terms of how marriage can impact how resources are transitioned. And those are the big pieces that I see based on what you had mentioned.
Thank you. Heath?
Sure. What's different for the community is establishing legal protections for partners if marriage or domestic partnerships do not exist. And this is along the lines of establishing wills, trusts, medical power of attorney, etc. And so some of this is a policy matter. Some of this is a sort of access matter. And some of this is an education matter because there has been some ice melting per se on these issues, and people need to keep up with. And I think one thing that, as Jesse mentioned, he's at the University of Maryland. As I mentioned, I'm with Prince George's Community College. I think there is a unique capacity for institutions of higher learning and public institutions to be able to educate and warehouse different types of matters. And of course, the LGBTQ plus community needs to know their rights. There's a huge movement in this country to know your rights on a number of matters, whether that's stop and frisk, or whether that's if you have polluted water in your streams. So I think that people need to know the full capacity of their rights, and we can all do a better job in the public sphere of engaging all communities, and especially on this front, the LGBTQ plus community.
Absolutely, thank you. And Fran?
Thanks. So for those of us who've been in the trenches providing services for the last 20 years, it's kind of funny. So I'm good friends with a prominent lesbian attorney who's a local and national leader in the issue of LGBTQ law. She practices still. She's an amazing local resource. We joke that we used to have like a real niche expertise, which was recreating the rights and privileges of marriage in a situation where marriage was impossible. Due to this astonishing and massive sea change in the rights of non-straight people to marry, we've seen a shift in our expertise because I have heterosexual unmarried couples, gay, married, every kind of in between. And so now we're sort of moving more into a zone where we're really individually tailoring. Are there legal gaps that might be left out, either because of how laws are structured, or more importantly, because of remaining prejudices and concerns about threats to law? So for example, even though there are marital laws that assume that your spouse is the other parent of your child, for gay and trans couples, the legal opinion out there is very strongly to do second parent adoption, because adoption laws are stronger than marital assumption of parentage laws. I am not an attorney. I am just parroting what the smart attorneys say. So this is an example where you might not be aware of a problem that could exist. I'm going to pick on Alabama for no good reason. When you're on vacation in Alabama with one of your kids who ends up in the hospital, and the hospital decides that you're the non-biological parent and you can't go in and be with them. But this is the kind of situation that we can face in an uneven situation in the US, where in some states rights for LGBTQ folk are expanding, and in other states they're constantly under threat. And you don't know what the future holds. So adoption laws are super strong. So that's one example. Another example of what's still sort of unique planning for this community is that some of types of insurance are very gender-based, and they're very, very binary gender-based, right? So when you're applying for life insurance or disability insurance to protect the value of your income to your family, we're in a situation where you're being underwritten as a man or a woman. And having someone to guide you who's not transphobic or just trans weird or ignorant, having someone to guide you through that process of determining the interface between that insurance company's underwriting policies and your gender status is really important. And there's no sugarcoating it. Like, we can't just merrily skip on our way and hop over this issue. So there's still a lot of areas where we bring specific expertise to the situation. But honestly, it was one of my life goals that being gay would be less remarkable over time. And it is less remarkable legally than it was when I was raising kids with my partner, who I couldn't marry back in the 80s and 90s. So, I'm thrilled that we're in this new environment, but between prejudice, ignorance, states that are, we're always worried about, and a few other items, and insurance law, we have to maintain a certain level of expertise in the financial services and financial literacy community. So these conversations, I think, are very important. I'm grateful that you're bringing this all up, Kelsey.
Yeah, thank you so much. Very excellent points raised by all of you, and I hope we can dive into them a little bit more through some of these questions, although I know the field is vast and there's a lot to touch on. So I thought we could frame our conversation today around the different life stages and maybe some different considerations you might need to make at each life stage. So with that in mind, I thought we could start out with what advice you might have for an LGBTQ plus person who is just starting out in their early adulthood. So maybe someone who's just graduated from high school or college, is pursuing their first job, and is maybe just thinking about managing their finances for the first time on their own. And perhaps this time we could start with Heath.
So thank you for that. And I do think that's a wonderful question, because adults move through life differently. And oftentimes what we're experiencing in the data is that when LGBTQ plus youth come out or otherwise declare their identity, is that there's a margin to be poor. And there's a stark contrast in terms of what some are able to accomplish. You went over the disparity in the numbers with the Experian report. And that is very real and very true. And I think even in cinema, you see this dramatized sometimes when a youth comes out and they sort of have an experience of being removed from their home. This was a tradition that went on, and not everyone has that same impetus so early on. So I think there's a love and empathy problem and an acceptance problem within families, which in traditional America, families have been seen as the bedrock for American progress and for American traditions. And so if we consistently alienate or marginalize youth early, it sets them back potentially, and I'm sure Fran has data on this and Jesse, but it sets them back half a decade to a decade and a half. And the discussions later on mean that, different lifestyle choices happen when people are sort of marginalized. They have to, satisfy themselves. They have to get acclimated to a new community. And I've spoken with gay men who have said that they have, lived a party lifestyle, weren't very focused early on, lost a lot of money, trying to support themselves at the individual level. And that was very risky for them. If they had it to do over again, that they would be wiser about money in their 20s and 30s. And I've also spoken to individuals who are in their 50s who are just realizing, oh, shucks, I might want to retire soon, and haven't really been dedicated to putting money aside. And so it runs the gamut. And people get married at different stages. I believe there was some data released about the average age of gay men when they get married is older, in their 30s. And so that's a different stage in life and income-wise. In terms of financial planning, those are the accumulation years. And that's a great time to, have a child is when you have money. And so when in instances where couples are getting married in the LGBTQ plus community, of course, money is a factor in any relationship. And if I can very quickly, just say that there's some elements of money that are basic for everyone. You can't spend more than you earn, and you can't rack up a bunch of bills that you can't afford, and certainly that you can't pay on time. And I think that here's Earl Wilson, his famous quote: "If you think nobody cares if you're alive, try missing a couple car payments." So I think in the LGBTQ plus community, some of the things are just the same as they are with everyone else, and some things are more nuanced.
Yeah, thank you. You raised some really good points about, we know that there are really high rates of LGBT homeless youth. So, if you are kind of starting out from a position of kind of having to play catch up or get to a stable place in your 20s, that can really set you back moving forward to build that wealth and build a retirement and build those things. So that can be very difficult. And I also really appreciate what you said about this kind of like party lifestyle in your 20s, because I was reading something about how some folks shared, because often LGBTQ folks have to build their family. It's not the family that they were given at birth. It's a family that they kind of created in a community. A lot of that revolves around going out to dinner rather than having dinner at the house, or kind of meeting in communal spaces that require spending more money. And so that can be a kind of consideration with, can just cost more to have that kind of relationship building experience. So thank you for sharing those thoughts. And Fran.
So advice for the brand newly hatched adult would be no different for straight people or whoever I'm talking to in that zone. It's going to be work on your earning potential, learn to track your expenses, utilize a program like You Need a Budget or Mint or something. Build your credit, educate yourself about credit. Credit is how people who end up with more money later handle problems. and they handle it responsibly. So learn about how to build good credit, how to manage your credit responsibly. Properly managed credit keeps people out of poverty to an astonishing degree. And it is like that, and income potential and controlling your expenses, I see as absolutely fundamental. Beyond that, with those three basics, the next priorities in my mind are building a bit of an emergency fund. And for those young people who are ready to start saving for the future, that's, maybe we can talk about that next time. But when I talk to a lot of my clients' kids, and our firm, we don't have like minimums. You don't have to be a certain whatever. So I do talk to a lot of young people who call for an initial consultation, and they just want to kind of start things off right. And those are my top priorities. Learning how to make more money, because you're going to need it. Learn how to manage and track your expenses, and learn how to keep your credit high and use it responsibly, because credit will be what lets you get ahead later.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Jesse.
And Heath and Fran did a nice job covering. I'll add a couple other things. I'm going to reemphasize the whole budget / spending plan, knowing where you want your money to go and making sure that it's going in those places. And even, throughout your life, you're going to have to make decisions about what your wants and needs are, right? That's something we all experience all the way even into retirement, and so always kind of reflecting, is that something that I want, or is that something I need? Is an important step with building your finances. The emergency fund was on my list. You also need to start thinking about retirement as soon as you can, and the dividends pay off immensely if you're able to establish that 401k or set up a retirement account, an IRA, in your younger years, because of that compounding interest. The other thing you need to start thinking about is, what are some of your midterm and long-term goals? So, hey, if you want to buy a car, how much can you save now to buy that car? Because the more money that you can save, the less you're going to pay in interest when you get that. And I use the car as an example, but a house is another example, right? You want to put so much money down on your house, and the less money that you have to borrow, the more money you save, because you're not paying someone else interest on those funds. The other item that I had on my list there was watch your credit cards, right? A lot of people, it's just so easy to swipe that credit card and not think about, how you're going to pay that money. And next thing you know, again, credit card interest rates are very high. If you have a good rate, it's probably 15%. And early on, people are paying probably as much as 30%. And so that's a high interest rate to pay on your money. Just watch that credit card and how you use it. But again, supporting everything that Fran and Heath said as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find there are a lot of misconceptions around how to use a credit card effectively to benefit you versus to set you back. So that's great advice. Heath, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, there's an author who wrote the book Automatic Millionaire, and he also wrote a book called Start Late, Finish Rich. And so there's hope for folks who, any background in life, who come into their working career, their accumulation phase a little later. And Fran had mentioned a couple resources like Mint. There are apps for that, right? And so apps are really key to some people's cell phone lifestyle. And people have the computer at the fingertips these days. And of course, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau also has some wonderful money as you go type, money as you grow type resources that analyze every stage of money. And so I oftentimes talk about the money spectrum, and it begins with a conversation on income and earning. And then it moves into how we plan our money, and then how we save it and spend it and borrow it, invest it and protect it. And of course, as Jesse alluded to, all the savvy ways in which you have to be aware of consumer habits and wants versus needs, and the emotional component behind purchasing, and acknowledging whether you or a partner, especially if you share an account, which is a whole other part of the discussion. Apparently, people in the LGBTQ plus community have fewer levels of shared accounts than traditional hetero couples. And so that is a really important notion, is that so that's some of the difference that people like to get at, is where are the differences with, you know, LGBTQ plus financial behaviors and the more heterosexual normative behaviors. And I think that that's really important. But starting a business is another great thing. And certain states, of course, have different laws. Fran alluded to sort of the interstate nature of this country. You look at a place like Indiana and some of the court cases that have come from just trying to sell a cake or being denied a cake. But business ownership and entrepreneurship are really key items. And that's one of those leveling up things you can do when you are good with credit, when you're good with savings, that you can use your money to venture into being a financed business one day. So those are just some thoughts to add on and build on the conversation.
Yeah, thank you. And to add to the app conversation, I use one called Daily Budget. It has totally changed my finance game, and it's free. So throw that one out there into the mix. And Heath, I think you kind of nicely transitioned us into this next life stage. And I think we've already kind of touched on it a little bit, but I wanted to see if anyone had anything to add about maybe the later 20s, early 30s, maybe more established in your career. What kinds of priorities should you be thinking about in that stage? And let's see, Fran, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, just all the things that Heath and Jesse so eloquently talked about are still in play. And I just wanted to specifically say, with that first job that's lucrative enough that you're like, now I can like take a breath and exhale, that that's when I like to see people start looking at retirement saving. But in concert with their total picture, I don't like to see people putting money away for retirement when they're paying 30% on a credit card, for example. So hopefully we're sort of fixing those problems early in the employment situation if they exist. But the priorities for me with younger folks for retirement savings, number one priority is always, if your employer has a plan that has what's called a match, where you put in 3% and they put in 3%, that's always priority number one, is capturing that match, because you're getting 100% rate of return as soon as you put money in. That's hard to beat. Then the second priority, in my view, once that match is being met, if there's additional future money that can be put aside, is Roth IRAs, which people under 50 can contribute up to $500 a month or $6,000 a year into. So there's kind of a hierarchy in my mind about which retirement accounts are the most effective, particularly for young people. The Roth IRA has numerous structural components that make it superior. One is liquidity. You can access your money if you have to without penalty, the money you've put in. And number two, it's going to have the greatest tax benefit to you over the course of your life. You put $10,000 in a Roth IRA when you're 25, you don't get a tax break because it's a Roth IRA. But when you take that money, but when you're 65, maybe that $5,000, it may have grown to $50,000 and there's no tax on it. So the majority of your money escapes the tax system. So again, just for retirement, number one, capture the match. Number two, fund your Roth IRA. But both of those need to be held in context with proper credit, not paying double-digit interest rates on anything, tracking your spending on an app, and having a bit of an emergency fund. So you're trying to like build the foundation of a coherent financial structure that will protect you from all the very challenging things out there.
Absolutely. Did anyone else have anything to add about the 20s and 30s time period?
I'll add, and it's from a little different context. You know, at this point, you're starting to get more serious about your relationships. And so you really have to have discussions about what that means to be more serious with your relationships. And Fran mentioned this earlier, some differences between being married and not being married and so forth. But you know, there's a it's kind of like a card game called Money Haptitudes out there, and it's how people their personalities and habits with money, their attitudes and habits towards money, and there's a relationship component that goes along with that, because finances is something you have to deal with throughout your lifetime. And so making sure that you're finding a partner that has similar values with you, or at least you're able to have similar discussions and have similar goals in the long term, can be very important. And so you need to kind of think about how your finances play into your relationships, because it is a very key element in terms of having a sustaining relationships. And so just touching on a little bit with that Fran mentioned again, you got to start thinking about what your will is going to look like. If something happens to you, what do those things look like? Your medical power of attorney, those kind of things. So there are also, some of those legal documents that you need to have discussions about and think about whether you're in a relationship or not. It's just a natural phase in life that you need to kind of, okay, what's going to happen to me and my finances and my belongings later on.
Right, Jesse. And I think that's so important. And sometimes age isn't the factor. It's whether you've done the things that Fran and Jesse and I are mentioning, that if you've actually saved and budgeted for the opportunity to buy a home, then that will get true recognition by lenders. And that will get true recognition by folks who can give you that first-time home buyer certificate if you've behaved well with money and you're ready. And so some things are just right for the time. Another notion that I wanted to mention was the Black Tax, a book by Sean Richardson. And I believe that one could also write the LGBTQ plus tax. And the whole notion is that there's sort of this cycle of sort of money draining characteristics of society. So if you think about, in many Black communities, you have the liquor store within a certain stone's throw from a school. And then the liquor store is next to a check cashing place. And then the check cashing place. And so it creates this cascading, compounding effect. And in the LGBTQ community, while it's not always a demographic based on race and a sort of a Black tax notion, there is a notion that because of the other strains and delays, like, the times in which somebody can get married, or the different things a person has to struggle with to get to a point where they can save money because they may have been removed from the house soon. Those are very visceral taxes on a person, and in terms of their ability to accumulate wealth and position themselves. And so, the CFPB, for example, has something called the Money Circle Toolkit. And storytelling, no one would believe how profound, Kelsey, that storytelling is. And one of the things Jesse mentioned was money habitudes. They look at whether you're spontaneous, you have traditions being carefree, whether you have traditions about status type living. And we know that in the LGBTQ plus community, when a person feels sort of disrespected, maligned, put out on the flanks, people of any ilk will do anything to get attention. And sometimes that means they'll waste their money on things like status just to feel like they're alive. Travel is another area in which people can throw away money by not researching travel deals or the best ways in which to do that. And so people want to get out, they want to see the world, they want to see the areas around them. They don't want to be bottled up, and they don't want to feel second class. And they'll spend to do that. And unfortunately, the other side of money habitudes, which is the more positive side, is how we plan money. How secure are we? What are our notions of security? Are we informed by that when we make those decisions along the lines of needs and wants? And the final one is giving, which is another rung in that spectrum of money where we give to. And we know that LGBTQ plus community members are some of the most empathetic people in existence. They care about the causes that are central to them having respect and dignity in this society, and they will give their money to see that through. And, you know, if Fran or myself or Jesse could tell folks, well, make sure that the best money is to use as saved money, and that you have a plan for even how you give. So that's some add-on, because people do get into their 20s and 30s and say, you know what, I've been mistreated. I want to stand up for people so that people don't have to go through it like I went through it. So I'm willing to sacrifice some money, maybe that they don't have or are in position to give sometimes.
I'll also put a quick plug in at University of Maryland, College Park. There's a program called the Together Program. And again, you could search it online, Together Program, University of Maryland, College Park. But again, it focuses on that whole discussion of relationships and money. So just a quick plug there, as I had an opportunity.
Yes, absolutely. A great program. And I did want to mention too, Heath, your idea of the LGBT tax got me thinking about this. Often folks move into cities or more urban areas to find more acceptance and inclusion and find that sense of community, and those can often be much more expensive places to live. So that could be part of that tax idea as well. And kind of the additional costs of just trying to avoid being discriminated against is very real. So thank you. Okay, so then we've already kind of jumped into this one a little bit too, but thinking more in depth about this idea of when you might want to start a family. We know LGBTQ plus folks who are interested in starting a family may be interested in starting a family as they move on through their life. They may want to formalize their partnership, which we've talked about a little bit already, but also if we could talk a little bit about wanting to have children, whether that be through surrogacy or adoption or any other kinds of means. What are the kind of financial considerations that someone might want to make as they begin to start a family? And who wants to jump in on this?
Well, I'll kick it off. James Baldwin, an author, you know, famous author and such, he made the comment, money, it turned out, was exactly like sex. You thought of nothing else if you didn't have it, and thought of other things if you did. And so sometimes things look rosier on the outside, and then you get into it and you realize, oh, this is just so, you know, taxing, so trying. And so with families and such, you realize all of the peripheral costs of having a child, from infancy, if indeed someone adopts at that age, or if different couples, if they're able to have a child biologically. And you realize that there's so many opportunity costs associated with having a child, and then multiple children. And so when you set aside money, of course, there are real considerations for anyone like 529s. And as Fran mentioned earlier, Roth IRAs are great things to start when a child is young, savings accounts, and really getting into those reading programs, Kelsey, at the library for children that expedite learning. There's a wonderful resource that the CFPB has for the 16 children's books that most focus children on the conversation about money. It comes with a toolkit for parents to read alongside those children. I'm a big proponent of that because in my past, I was summer reading program coordinator in Little Rock, Arkansas, and we did public programs with children and outreach. And I found it very interesting that when you, reading is fundamental, gave a statistic that 1 in every 317 children actually have a book that in their own possession that was at grade level in poverty. So people from poverty backgrounds don't have that. And sometimes LGBTQ plus folks, the sort of spectrum on the different levels of money and income that they ascribe to, there are a number of folks who would qualify as at or above, just at or above the poverty line. So it does make it more frustrating, more difficult when someone wants to have a child and they don't have a lot of saved money to their name. And it can be cumbersome if you don't plan. And so those types of resources really help families have better outcomes.
I'll just build real quickly off of what Heath mentioned with kids. I did a quick search while he was talking, you know, and you look at the numbers, it's about $13,000 a year per child. And so that's a big shift in your budget when you think, okay, I'm gonna have a child. Now I've also heard people talk about, well, we want to make sure that we have enough money saved before we start into this phase. And I don't know that you need to go that far. I think that can be overly cautious, but you do need to understand that there is a financial change, a financial shift when you start talking about adding children to the family budget. Yeah.
Well, this is definitely one of my specialty areas, and I want to alert people to a community resource that's unbelievably great, which is rainbowfamilies.org. I'm on the board, so I'm a little prejudiced, but I've been affiliated with this group for a very long time. And in fact, Sunday, I'm teaching the financial part of a class that they run several times a year called Maybe Baby for LGBTQ folks thinking about starting a family. And there are many wonderful topics covered: paths to parenthood, multiracial families, financial and legal aspects. There's so many amazing things, but Rainbow Families is an outstanding community resource. And there's actually almost no organizations like this anywhere else in the world. We have like 2 or 3 other groups we've been able to find around the world. So it's an amazing local resource. We have all kinds of support groups, education groups, fun events, social events, conferences, the whole thing. So definitely check that out in that phase. But there are specific things that I cover about a family starting out or a new family. I have a whole presentation around the 5 steps of your financial foundation. We've covered some of them. But the things that I would add that come into play in this phase, which have been mentioned, one is a proper estate plan, because we don't really care about your stuff, let's be blunt, but we really care about your kids. So one of the things people don't quite understand all the time is that a will is an absolutely foundational piece of who cares for and how your child and the money for your child are cared for if you died unexpectedly young. Absolutely irreplaceable. Another critical thing that gets overlooked is a proper insurance review, especially including life insurance. And if you're self-employed, very important, disability insurance. Most self-employed people neglect their disability insurance. And most young families have never actually taken a look at their life insurance needs and said to each other, honey, if I died in 5 years, I've analyzed it and you'll be completely fine. Don't worry. That is a conversation that a very small number of families have engaged in. And almost always they only engage in it if a financial person helps them with that engagement. So there are resources out there. I don't even like Susie Orman, but she does have good recommendations in this regard. But we're looking at literally 10 times your income or more in a life insurance benefit in order to put your spouse in a non-catastrophe situation. So, and for young families, we're often looking at more like 15 or 20 times your income. So for many people I work with, that's $1 million or multi-million-dollar policy. When you're young, it's not very expensive. If you're healthy, there's resources to help you get that. So putting that like foundational security structure around a family is critically important. We're at this stage, people are working towards home ownership, and they got all these competing priorities. You got your retirement, your daycare, your college fund, your emergency fund, you want to travel to see mom. Like, you got all these things going on that are competition for those scarce dollars you bring home. But we don't want to leave out the things that can protect you from a ruinous financial situation. So those are super important. That's kind of something I really emphasize for this phase. I jokingly say, this is where we do some adulting. This is where you really have to show up for the adult stuff, because there's nothing more boring, irritating, depressing, and aggravating than life insurance. So we gotta analyze it, we gotta buy it, we gotta get it done, and then we can forget about it. So these are the sorts of things we talk about. That's what I want to say on this early family phase. And I will say, because most, not all, LGBTQ folks can't get knocked up and start their family a touch before they were quite intending to. Some can, some not all, but it's less typical. We often see a later onset of child rearing and a little bit of a more intentional process. And I joke with them all the time in the Maybe Baby class. I'm like, wouldn't it be great if straight people had to do this first? Like, that would be such a huge benefit to society if straight people engaged in, I don't know, a multi-year process of discernment about whether this is the moment they want to have a child, how they want to have it, etc. But that's, as we know, not really how it happens usually. So, but it's something that I think the LGBT community can actually be leaders on, is this conversation. And seeing this as a strength of the community, I think is a great thing.
I love that. And I did just want to highlight too, that often like adoption or surrogacy are very, very expensive processes too. So thinking about if you want to start a family, not only can you be much more intentional about it, but you probably do, I would imagine, need to have quite a bit more saved up or budgeted out in order to do that.
There are low cost routes. Adoptions through, the DHS, through public sphere, through foster care is not expensive. And some of us started our families with an informal impregnation situation. So there are ways to do it that don't cost an arm and a leg. Surrogacy is at the top of the chain. That's like $100,000, but there's ranges from 0 to 100,000, if you will. But once the kid's born, oh yeah, it's expensive. There's no way around it. Heath has kids. Jesse, I don't know if you have kids, but yeah. And I raised my kids on quite a low income at the time. So I'm quite familiar with the struggles of, making that hang together.
And Kelsey, real quickly, one thing that Fran mentioned was about wills, and Jesse's mentioned it, and I've mentioned it as well. And what I've also researched in the past several weeks has been that after filing my own will, was that beneficiary status supersedes wills in the law. And, that people, and I say this, everybody doesn't, we've said a lot of generalizations here. And so some of these, for individual cases might be different. And so if we've talked around you or your individual situation, just note that we are speaking to what we see in the data, which characterizes people in a certain way that doesn't diminish individual situations. So I wanted to say that, but also wanted to mention that, I've spoken with guys, again, who, in leading up to this moment here, who've said, there's a frequency of partners and different relationships you're in, and then you're out, and then you're with somebody new. And sometimes you might be really close with someone and list them as a beneficiary potentially. And if you don't change their name after you break up, they're going to get that benefit. And so that's something that's said to even heterosexual couples and others who may not even be married, but have people that they want as a beneficiary who they may stop liking at some point, and then they never change that status. And so that's an important realization. The other thing really quickly was that FEMA, and so we're talking about sort of life transitioning and stuff like that. And FEMA has a program starting in 3 days, April 12th, called Funeral Assistance. If you died, if a partner, family member died of COVID-19, you are eligible potentially for funeral assistance. That could be huge for people because funeral costs are also exorbitant in this country. Just to cremate somebody, and I had a friend pass away the other day in Alabama, and his wife was told that cremate him is $17,000. Who has that just out of pocket, especially when you're 7 months pregnant or something? So really difficult situations around that, but funeral costs at different points in life can.
The other component, can you hear me? Okay, my sound, I'm having trouble with my sound right now. The other component is some people may not identify until later in life, and they may already have children by that point in time, or they may not, but they find that they're going to experience a significant change in their income as a result of being separated from someone else. And so again, but all these things we mentioned earlier just fall along with it in terms of making sure that you have a budget, you have a plan, that you've thought through it. All those things are important components to think about there.
Yeah. Well, we are almost at our time already, and we haven't even gotten to all my questions because there's just so much to talk about in this arena. I think this was a really great conversation. I wanted to give everyone a chance, if you had like one thing that you wanted to make sure we said today that we didn't cover yet, maybe if everyone could do their like 1-minute spiel about the thing that you're passionate about that we didn't say. So I don't know who wants to start us off. Jesse, do you have any kind of last thoughts that you wanted to share?
You know, I think, you know, I guess my final thought is, remember that when you think about your life plans, your finances play an important part of that. And so you have to think about that into your life plan, because a lot of people have all these ideas, dreams, whatever it may be, and it's great to have those things, but you also need a plan to go along with it. When I teach programs, you know, I always talk about the goal setting piece and how we use our GPS, right? Of course, I live in Western Maryland. If I want to get to Baltimore, I enter in on my phone. I want to go to, you know, wherever in Baltimore, and it gives me step-by-step instructions on how to get there. And so when you think about your finances, what are your step-by-step instructions that you have that's going to get you to the financial position that you want to be in?
Heath?
Absolutely. And again, it's been a pleasure, joy to be a part of this conversation. I have a resource that I have on the screen right now. And at the Financial Empowerment Center, you know, everything, like I said, we do is free. It's not to undermine any other businesses or what have you. It's a free service that is on a grant. And folks are welcome to come to the center. They can go to our website, pgcc.edu/go/FEC. Again, the personal financial coaching option is very important. We do something called the Virtual Empowerment Hour as well, where we have programming throughout the month. Ironically, this month is National Financial Capability Month, a wonderful time in the country to accentuate everything money. I put together a curated list, Kelsey, that I wouldn't mind going out to every single person who signs up. And if you're able to send your information in, you can request this from me personally as well at the center at fec@pgcc.edu. And this curated item has so much. It's a really wonderful resource. It talks about Prudential Presents. It talks about the debtfreeguys.com, which is a couple gay guys who've gotten together, and they have wonderful video resources. We look at the state of the LGBTQ plus community, different youth opportunities initiatives around LGBTQ outcomes, LGBTQ finances at risk amid COVID-19 pandemic, being Black and LGBTQ, and what folks face. And so it's a really vast resource. Online efforts encourage LGBTQ Americans to mind their financial P's and Q's, the housing discrimination and how to spot it and what to do from an LGBTQ point of view. NerdWallet has a wonderful platform and resource. So those are some of the things that I wanted to share. And again, it's been a real pleasure to speak on these matters. All of our community members need to be able to go in search of their dignity and have that at the end of the day. And in a capitalist society, it's a civil right to me to have information and knowledge how to act wisely into your money. So thanks so much. And I hope this reaches as many people in our region, as Fran has said, as possible.
Absolutely. Thank you, Heath. That's a really great list of resources. We'll be sure to try to get that out there, posted somewhere. And Fran.
I'll be quick because Heath and Jesse have covered so much, and I'm super excited to meet them because now I have an additional resource to send people to also. But what I'd like to say is you are worth good financial advice. There's a lot of shame around money. I deal with shame every day at work and feelings of inadequacy and like you ought to be able to do it better. And I tell people, you don't fix your car, right? You're not ashamed that you can't tell if your distributor cap is leaking. You don't have any guilt because your wheel bearings need to be replaced. So it's very reasonable that you need to reach out for financial guidance and assistance. And there are resources all the way up the chain. Free resources, educational resources are outstanding. They're a cornerstone and they're getting better. There are also a lot of independent advisors like me who are not pushing products. I think that's really key to mention. Some people who sell products can do it with a pretty good sort of unbiased approach, but many don't. And the reality is if you're lower income, you're more likely to encounter a financial advisor who's representing products from a specific company rather than giving more sort of higher level advice in your best interest. So I encourage you to ask about an advisor's independence and to, but to not take one sort of off experience as a reason to not seek advice. There's a fundamental principle that I try to get people to get through into their thinking, which is that paying for advice is way cheaper than paying for mistakes. And we're talking many, many orders of magnitude difference. So don't be sort of penny wise and pound foolish. Maybe you can find the resources you need that are free. If so, fantastic. But not everything is free that you need, and getting proper guidance can make a life-altering change for you. So that's my slightly self-interested, tooting my own horn pitch, which is really use the community resources, which include free things like Heath's program and Jesse's and Rainbow Families, and also use people like me who have a business where we really try to attend to the needs of our community in a transparent and functional way.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much to all three of you, to Fran, to Heath, and Jesse for joining me today. And we'll be sure to post as many links as all the amazing resources that were mentioned this hour in the description as we can, so folks can see all of those, as well as to your organizations to reach out to you directly. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Remember that you can find more programs like this one by visiting pgcmls.info and going to the events calendar, or checking our PGCMLS YouTube page to watch recordings of past programs, and have a great day.